technical assistance statewide for those schools that have signed up for Cash for College program. Our technical assistance includes things like today, where we'll be offering some GoToMeeting and webinar sessions for information about FAFSA and about other types of technical assistance to promote FAFSA application completion with your schools. So we're very excited about that. We're going to have a toolkit available. We're going to have conference calls and TA sessions that are completely voluntary that schools may sign up for throughout the year, just to provide more information and to share information about what you all are doing to promote FAFSA completion. So again, my name is Jennifer Arsenian with Alabama Possible, and I'm coordinating the statewide program for Cash for College for Alabama Possible. Today we're going to have a session on FAFSA for guidance counselors and others to answer questions and go over the basics regarding how to help students complete those applications. So I'm going to introduce our presenter in just a second. Let me do say one announcement that the U.S. Department of Education has announced as of January 29th, 2016, that the maximum amount for the Pell Grant Award is $5,815. So that is the amount that we were notified as of yesterday is the maximum amount for Pell Grants, $5,815. So I just wanted everyone to know about that new announcement. We are recording this session, so if you have any technical problems or have colleagues that could not join us, we'll be recording it and we will be emailing out a link to that as well. Throughout the presentation, if you have comments or questions, please put those in the chat box, and we will be checking that throughout the session. We do have folks muted, so that way we don't have background noise, but I will be monitoring the chat box and address questions to our presenter as they come up. So let me go ahead and get us started. Our presenter today is Stephanie Miller. She's the Assistant Director of Student Financial Services for Jacksonville State University. And she is going to provide us with information about FAFSA. So any questions related to that, again, put them in the chat, and we will answer those as the session continues. I want to thank you so much, Stephanie, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
So today we are going to talk about financial aid. We're going to talk about financial aid, how it relates to you and how it relates to your student. I have a bit of a cough today, so I apologize in advance for that. So, so this is what we're going to talk about today. Now, I have my information listed on this slide, so you will have that for your future use. That's my contact information, as well as my my name and the other things that are on there. So let's talk about it. We're going to talk about what is financial aid, who can get financial aid, how much can a student get, how do they apply, what happens next, and where can a student go to get more info. Now I want to ask you this, and I know I'm used to doing presentations all the time, and I like to have crowds to respond back to me, and I'm not going to ask you to respond in your chat. But when you think about financial aid, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? Are you scared? Are you scared to help your students? Are your students scared? Are your parents scared? You know, what resources are out there to help you to effectively help your students to obtain the most funding possible? So I just want you to know that you're not alone. There are people like me all over the state, all over the nation that will be glad to help you, but you have to ask. Don't let the news scare you into something and thinking something that may not be exactly right. There are a lot of things that are put out on those news stations that say, oh, by the way, the government's going to do this in education. Well, not really when it comes down to it. So we just need to be aware that if you don't understand something, call someone who does, or at least can say, you know what, I don't know until the government tells me more information. I don't know what to tell you. So just remember, you're not alone. Everyone has questions, from the parent to the student to you to even me to the government a lot of times. So don't be afraid to ask for help. So when we talk about financial aid, we need to know what it is. Financial aid is grant. It's any money that the student receives to pay for college or post-secondary school. So it could be grants, it could be loans, it could be work study, it could be scholarship. But each of these starts with a little preparation. I always tell my parents and students when I go out to different high schools and to different meetings, I always ask, you know what, do you think If you don't go and take a driver's test and make out the application, do you think they'll ever give you a driver's license? Well, no. If you don't start your student and fill out the paperwork for them to start in kindergarten, will they ever actually start at that school? No, and it's the same way with financial aid. We want to make sure that students are prepared and they know that they have to do a little something in order to qualify for those funds. So who can receive aid? U.S. citizen or permanent resident or eligible non-citizen. The person needs to be a high school graduate or GED holder. They need to have a valid Social Security number. Males need to be registered for selective service. On the FAFSA, it asks the student, do you wish to be registered for selective service? I always tell parents and students to mark yes, because if you are 17, if your student is 17 and they're going to turn 18 in the middle of the school year and they're not at your school, where you guys are going to give them the registration cards for selective service or have them get online and do that, then they may forget, and it could affect their aid between the fall and spring semesters. So we want to make sure that those students do that. We want to make sure they have a valid Social Security number. So many times we have students who put in the wrong Social Security number or the wrong name or the wrong date of birth, and in those instances, students have to start over. So if Johnny's name is William Jonathan Smith, then that's what they should use on the FAFSA if that is what's on their Social Security card. And if you notice, I skipped one thing, eligible degree or certificate program. Were you aware that some schools, even though they offer financial aid, there are certain degrees or programs that may not be financial aid eligible at that school? For example, JSU has a pre-engineering program, and that program, we don't give a degree for that. It's basically almost like a 2-year school where the student comes, receives pre-engineering for 2 years, and then moves to an engineering school for whatever they may be encountering, mechanical or chemical, whatever, aerospace, whatever they may be working on, that's what it's designed for. So that particular program is not federal financial aid eligible. So if your student has a program that you're like, I'm not sure about, maybe that student should check with the school to make sure it's an eligible program. The next thing, if you notice on this page, is satisfactory academic progress. You and I both know that students need to make a certain GPA to maintain their status. So not only do they have to maintain their GPA, they also have to complete at least 2/3 of their classes, or 67% of their classes, with passing grades to remain eligible. So if a student doesn't do that, it's only fair that the government says, you may not be receiving any more money because you didn't meet the qualifications. Now the government doesn't know what a student's GPA is or what or how many classes that they may or may not have passed. So that falls on the school, but it's still a rule. So be aware to make sure that your students know, hey, you need to maintain something. You have to do your end of the bargain. So where does a student begin? If there's anything that you teach your students, is that the FAFSA stands for free. It is a free application for federal student aid. It is free at FAFSA.gov. If a parent or student goes to another website, they may ask you to pay. At .com, they ask you to pay. Why would you pay for something that's free by the federal government? They manage the entire software. So when I do presentations and I talk to students and parents, I say, hey, what is it? It's free at .gov. So they can remember that. We had a lady back several years ago who called me and said, hey, I'm about to put in my credit card information. I said, oh, no, you don't need to put in your credit card information. Where did you get that link? And she said, well, I got it from your website. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. She didn't get that from my website, but what had happened, my IT staff figured out that the student or the parent had loaded some type of game or other software on their computer. It had a spyware. And as part of that spyware, if the person typed in Pell Grant, it directed them to FAFSA.com. If they typed in FAFSA.gov, it redirected them to .com. So you need to make sure that your students and your parents are aware to go to FAFSA.gov and complete the application, and double check that that is indeed the website that is listed at the top of the page. So this is what the FAFSA website looks like. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I guess, Jennifer, you can let me know. But on this page, you'll see a Start a New FAFSA. that is where your parents and students will go to start a new FAFSA. Now, if you start the FAFSA and save it or know that you've got to make a correction, then you go to log in because you should have everything out there already for you. So when does a student complete the FAFSA? Well, or why do they need to complete a FAFSA, excuse me? Well, you know what? The FAFSA starts all the processes for receiving federal funds, for Pell grants, for student loans, for other types of grants, for supplemental grants, for PLUS loans, which are parent loans, for work study, for Perkins loans. And I'm going to tell you that on this slide I left Perkins loans. The government actually did away with Perkins loans this past fall. However, they released some legislation recently that said they may extend it. So I don't know. I left it on there, but be aware that that may not be available to you. Teach grants. Those grants that are grants that may become loans, but anything that the government offers, you have to do the preparation to start on the free application for federal student aid. And some scholarships depend upon this. Now, I know you see that last line down there, and I don't want to read it to you, but we had a lot of parents and students, they would come into our office before the economic downturn, and they would say, oh, I've got enough money to cover my students' tuition, I don't have to worry about it. Well, then Dad lost their job. Well, what do you think happened when Dad lost their job? That money that was in savings for that student's education now had to go to pay for bills. So we want to make sure that even if a student doesn't think they're going to use it, or they don't think they're going to qualify for a grant, they still need to complete the application. You never know when your situation, when a student's situation is going to change. Maybe they have to move from one school to the other. Maybe for some reason they lost their scholarship in the middle of the year. Maybe you lost your job accidentally. There's a variety of things that could happen in our lives that we don't know about. So I always encourage the students and the parents to fill these out no matter what. So at least one parent and the student must have an FSA ID. Now the FSA ID is the old PIN number, and I'm going to tell you, you need to keep this forever. And if you make one, write it down. Make sure you use an email address that will be used, not the high school email address, not the college email address, something that will be used, because if you have an issue with the FSA ID, it is hard to get it resolved with the government. It could take 3 to 5 business days for something to be resolved, and we don't want that to happen to our students and our parents. So make sure they write down these IDs and passwords and put them where they put their Social Security card and things like that. Not too long ago, I had an instance in my office where a student was there, did not know their user ID and password for the FSA ID. We put them on the computer. When we got the student on the computer, the student didn't know anything, so it asked the student some challenge questions. Well, the first challenge question was, what was the name of your first boyfriend? Well, this particular student looks at me and he said, "Ma'am, I'm not." He just kept stuttering, and I said, "Well, it's okay, you know, if you had a boyfriend." He said, "No, ma'am, that's not my question. I don't have a boyfriend, and I wouldn't because of the girls." And I use that as an example. This is the student talking, not me saying one way or the other. So please be aware of that. But he also, so I said, "Let's go to the next question." And the next question was, "What was your first prom? Who was your prom date?" And he said, "Ma'am, I didn't go to prom." So we quickly figured out that his parent had made his ID and had answered part of the questions for him and part of the questions for her, and he could not obtain his FSA ID. So be aware that you need to make sure the student gets their ID and the parent gets theirs, and we know whose is whose. So make sure you keep it forever. This is what the FSA ID website looks like, and if you notice, there's a login, there's a create, and there's an edit. When a student doesn't know their ID or their username or password, they will actually send a secure code to the email for that student. But once again, if the student can't get into the email, then you have an issue. Now, I oftentimes suggest to parents and students that they create an email just for the student and for the parent to view together for the federal financial aid and for scholarships. It's an outside email outside of both of their individual emails, so that they can have something to refer back to and to know that this was filed or this was completed or this needs to be done. Because I can already tell you that anything that comes from the free application of federal student aid will go to that student's email address. And if mom can't get in there, she may miss out on important information that she sees that she wants to view. So when do you start? Every year the FAFSA becomes available on January 1st. And so we want to start this as soon as possible. Now, if a student is planning on attending this fall and spring, 16 and 17, then they're going to fill out a 16-17 FAFSA. If a student is planning on coming in the summer, they're going to fill out the 15-16 FAFSA and the 16-17 FAFSA, okay? Now, and I say this because we oftentimes have athletes or band members or other students who are going to come in the summer to get an early start. So make sure you ask your students, are you planning on going in the summer? And if so, they need to fill out the 15-16 FAFSA using the taxes that they filed in January of 14 and the 16-17 FAFSA, in which the taxes will be the ones that they are just filing correct right now. Now I want you to notice this new. This new says that the 17-18 FAFSA is actually going to open in October of 2016. Now, remind your parents and students that they have to do a FAFSA every year, okay? And that the FAFSA for 17-18 is going to open in October. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is brand new. The government has not given us a lot of information as to how and when we will be processing these and what will happen, because they have to get things out a whole lot quicker than they have in the past for us to be able to use the October 2016 date. Be aware, counselors, that 16-17 will use the taxes that are filed right now. 17-18 will also use the taxes that are filed right now. So the parents will be using the same tax return for 2 different years. The government cannot tell us at this point in time if a student messes up accidentally on the 16-17 and then on the 17-18 puts corrected information in, if we will be required to go back and redo the 16-17 and then them have to pay back money if that happens. We don't know. So please keep in mind that we need to make sure that all information is correct from 16-17 and 17-18 because of this using the same tax return. So this is the process. We get the free application. We go to FAFSA.gov. It starts in January. When the FAFSA.gov, when the information is submitted, the student will receive a confirmation page. I'm here to tell you that that confirmation page is an estimate. This confirmation page will say if you're eligible for a Pell Grant or not, or if you can get student loans or not. Well, you know what? What if the school that your student lists, which, by the way, you could have up to 10 different schools on the FAFSA, and I always suggest to put where the student wants to go, where the student, the local 2-year and the local 4-year, so that the student has options if their situation changes. So the school will receive an ISER, and the student will receive a student aid report that goes where? To the email address that is on the FAFSA. So once again, any updates or things like that will go to that email address that's listed on the FAFSA. So you say, well, you know what? Why does a student need to start so early? Well, I can tell you why they need to start early, because sometimes we have funds that are first come, first serve. I get a very little amount, a very small amount of Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. It goes quickly to those students who have completed their files first. So be aware that while the government funds certain items, they only give limited amounts to certain schools, and so you need to make sure that, that you need to make sure that the students file in a timely fashion. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but when the student files, they're not done. they're not completed. This government may decide that the parent and the student have to turn in anywhere from 1 to 8 different forms, and we don't know until the FAFSA comes back. So most oftentimes, the school, for example, JSU, we send an email to the student's JSU email address saying, hey, by the way, we've received your FAFSA, but you know what? The government has selected you to turn in additional forms. Here's how you do it. So make sure your students are checking their emails from those particular schools. So a lot of questions that I receive from counselors and that I receive from parents and students is, well, I want my student to be an independent. I don't file my student on my taxes. So we're going to go over what it takes to be a dependent or independent student on the FAFSA. And if you're going to notice, what is not here is something about taxes. Were you born before January 1st by a certain date? This date changes every year, and this year it's 1993. So a student has to be pretty much 23, almost 24, or 24 to be considered independent. As of today, are you married? At the beginning of the school year, will you be working on a master's or doctoral degree? I'm going to tell you this is one of the most common errors on our FAFSAs. A lot of times students and parents don't understand that an associate's is 2 years, a 4-year is bachelor's degree, and then after that, then they go to the master's or doctoral program. So a lot of times a student will say, it says professional degree on some of things, and students say, well, I'm working on a nursing degree, so that's professional, and they will actually put that accidentally on their FAFSA form. Is the student currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? Is the student a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? And be aware the definition of veteran is different than what an actual veteran is with the federal government. So on the FAFSA, there is some information about that. It asks the students, do you now have or will you have children who will receive more than half of their support from you between January 1 of 16 and June 30 of 17? Now, I'm here to tell you, if a student lives at home and their parents take care of that student's child, is that more than half of the support from the student? No. Probably not. Now, if the student's going to move out of the parent's house with the child, then they may be answering yes to that. Do you have dependents other than the children or spouse? We indeed had one student who actually took care of their mother who had Alzheimer's, and he was her power of attorney, and he worked, and so he answered yes to this question. But be aware, most of our students in high school are not going to answer yes to this question. At any time since the student turned 13, were both parents deceased, or were they in foster care, or were they a dependent or ward of the court? Did the court and the state of residence say that the student was an emancipated minor, meaning they sued their parents for their own custody, basically? Or as determined by a court, is the student in legal guardianship? And a lot of times we have this question: the student lives with grandmother, and because for whatever reason, if this did not go through some type of lawyer or court decision, then a student cannot put that they're in legal guardianship with someone. So be aware that most schools require that a student turn in the information with these questions if the student marks yes to one of these to make them independent. At any time on or after July 1, 2013, did your homeless high school liaison declare that the student was homeless or self-supporting? And that document will need to be on file with the financial aid office. Or at any time, I'm sorry, that I said 13, but that should have been 15. Did the director, and I think it was the typo on the previous slide, so I apologize, did the director of an emergency or transitional housing program funded by HUD determine that the person was an unaccompanied youth or at risk of being homeless? So on this, if your students answer no to all of these questions, then they are going to be considered a dependent student for FAFSA purposes. Now, I'm going to try to switch over and show you something. If you will go, I want to see if this works. I tried it a minute ago and it worked. All right, so you should be able to see currently a screen called studentaid.ed.gov. If you as a counselor, anyone needs to know, okay, what were those questions again? If you will type in dependency status, then this is going to come up. And it asks the questions, and it actually has a nice PDF or a picture here that you can actually open up and view the questions, yes, no, and follow the flow chart. It also lists the questions here that make the student a dependent or independent. Notice it says nothing about whom the student, who filed whom on the student taxes. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. If there's anything that you're not sure of as a counselor and you can't get in to see someone, hey, look, there is all of this information on here for students, and there's even checklists for students. So just be aware that that is available to you as a counselor. So back on our presentation here, who goes on the FAFSA? The government, as I said, doesn't care who files whom on the taxes. They really don't care about that at all in any form or fashion. What they want is to know who did the student live with more during the past 12 months, who is a biological parent. So what I do is I ask a student, where do you call home? And if the student says mom, guess who needs to go on the FAFSA? Mom. If the student says dad, then dad does. Be aware, if the parent is remarried, then the student must use the parent and the step-parent's information. If the student lives with grandparents or other relatives or other people, they should not be on the FAFSA unless they've legally adopted the student. It goes back to those questions that we talked about earlier, legal guardians or homelessness or foster care, or orphan or ward of the court, or the parent's deceased, those types of things. If the student's biological parents are not married, but they live together in the same household. We had a student who said, hey, yeah, my dad lives on the bottom floor and my mom lives on the top floor. Hey, well then guess what? They both go on the FAFSA because the government says whether they were married or not, if they live at the same residence, they both go on the FAFSA. Now, I'm here to tell you that if a student, remember those 1 to 8 forms that I was talking about? If a student says on the FAFSA that they live with dad and comes in and fills out the forms that they live with mom, what do you think is going to happen to that student's FAFSA file or their financial aid file? Do you think I can process aid? No. Now I've got conflicting information, and I have to figure out who the student actually lives with and what information we need to gather. So be aware that when you talk with your parents and your students that you make sure they know who's on that FAFSA and they know who has to be listed on those forms that may need to be filed after the fact, okay? All right, so what information? Remember we talked about this, the Social Security card name. It needs to be the name that appears on the Social Security card for the parent and for the students. Make sure you get the driver's license for the student. Make sure the dates of birth are correct. Make sure the Social Security number is correct. Check and recheck. If that Social Security number is wrong for the student, you have to start over. The government will tell you, oh, no, you can go in and change that. But I'm here to tell you that the government likes to reject people who have multiple FAFSAs and different socials. So they need to start over, okay? This is someone who works with it every day. So make sure they just start over. They need their tax returns. They need to know if there's any asset information. If you notice this free and reduced lunch and the food stamp, I'm going to tell you that on the FAFSA form, it asks about SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It does not come out and say food stamps. We have a lot of students and parents who actually don't check the question when they are receiving those because they did not know what SNAP was. So please make sure your parents and students know that food stamps is indeed SNAP on the FAFSA. If a parent or student has any veterans benefits, and of course their W-2 or other information of income that they may be receiving, as well as if they are not a citizen or they're an eligible non-citizen or U.S. permanent resident, they need that information. If a student is a U.S. citizen, but the parent is not, There's some specific information on the FAFSA that says if the parent does not have a Social Security number, and I'm not talking about a working Social Security number, I'm talking about an actual Social Security number, then that parent and student is to enter all zeros. It will be flagged. They will not be able to get an FSA ID. They will have to print off the signature page at the end and mail that in to the government. It'll be flagged, and the student and the parent will then have to fill out some information with the school, and the school will then verify that, yes, indeed, they do not have a Social Security number, and we'll have to verify that with the government in order to continue to process the student's aid. So a lot of people want to know, why do we need tax information? Because that's one of the main criteria that the government uses to determine need-based funds. Now, on the FAFSA, there is an IRS data retrieval tool, or IRS DRT, that we really want parents and students to use if all possible. Because one of those forms that the government may ask for is tax returns. These tax returns, if they don't use the data retrieval tool, have to come directly from the IRS as a tax return transcript. Right now, it could take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks for a parent to get that after a request. We don't want students to be put behind because they can't get the tax return. So if a parent and student can't use the IRS data retrieval tool, go ahead and have them request the IRS tax return transcript on the IRS website, and then when the data retrieval tool, just in case, and then when the data retrieval tool becomes available, then they go out and use that. Because if they use that retrieval, then we don't have to ask for the taxes. Now, if you notice on here, it says these particular people are not eligible to use the retrieval tool. If you married filing separately, or if you are married and you filed taxes as head of household. I don't know how many of you know this, because until I started working this job, I really wasn't aware. But if people are married, if parents are married, they cannot file head of household legally. And we will ask the parents, if they are married legally, we will ask the parents to refile their taxes. We're not trying to be mean. We're not trying to be ugly or disrespectful. But we just want to make sure that the government has told us, hey, if they're married, they can't file head of household, and therefore you have to tell them to refile their taxes. So please make sure your parents and students know that. Notice if they have an amended return, they have to turn in different items than they would to us than otherwise, and you can see the other things that are out there. So once the FAFSA is filed, what happens? Well, as I said before, the government will send an email to the student's email address on the FAFSA saying that it's been processed. It will also give them the expected family contribution and those estimates. Remember I said about those estimates? Let's say a student made $100,000 or a parent made $100,000 and they only put $10,000 on the FAFSA. Do you think for some unknown reason that student and parent would probably get a Pell Grant? Yeah, they would. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm getting a Pell Grant. Well, then they turn in their taxes, and what happens? Oh, you made $100,000, then we have to take that away. It's because it's an estimate, so please remind everyone that's an estimate. It'll also give you an estimate of how much loan a student might receive. But guess what? Some schools don't do student loans, especially some two-year schools. They don't do student loans. So be aware, excuse me, be aware that just because it's on there does not mean that a student is finished or that that's what they're going to receive. Now, the expected family contribution, a lot of students and parents think, oh, well, that's what I'm getting, and that's actually not the case. What that is saying that a student or parent can actually, when they look at this, that's what the government says that the parent or student could absorb in their budget if they had to. And parents go, what? I can't absorb anything into my budget. Well, if your car broke down and you had to have repairs, you might have to make payments, but you would have to absorb it into your budget, right? Most of the time people say yes. So with that being said, that's kind of what that is and how I explain it to parents and students. Once again, make sure that you look for the emails or the letters from the schools that you have sent the FAFSA to make sure that they have additional paperwork that you know how to get that and complete that. So why would a student or a parent need more information? Well, I'm going to here to tell you, because the government said so. They randomly select 30% of the population for us to verify various items. It could be, as I said, one form. It could be 8 forms. We never know. So please be aware that the schools will have to ask students for those documents. And each year, the request may change for those documents. So just be aware. So let's talk about this just for a minute. What types of aid can a student qualify for? Well, they can qualify for Pell Grants. Pell Grants are free money. And you say, woohoo, free money, that's awesome. Well, if the student fails to complete the courses with passing grades and they just stop attending classes, guess what? They may have to pay back all or a portion of that money. If a student stops attending and withdraws, they may have to pay back all or a portion of that money. So be aware that the Pell Grant is free money, but you got to do something in return, or the student does. Iraq and Afghanistan service grants. Those grants are for students of parents who have passed away in one of those 2 wars as part of service to the U.S. government. If the student is not eligible for a Pell Grant or only eligible for a small amount, the government actually tells us how much a student can receive up to a certain point to help them with their schooling. Then we have student loans. There's actually 2 types. A subsidized loan, which is a need-based loan, and an unsubsidized loan. The subsidized loan, the government wants the student, does not require that the student pay the interest while in school. The government actually pays the interest for the student as long as they're enrolled at least half time. It's a great deal. Where else in your life at age 17 or 18 can you go and get up to $3,500 in an interest-free loan for probably 4 or maybe 5 years as long as you remained enrolled in at least half time somewhere? The answer is nowhere, okay? So that's one type of student loan. The other type of student loan is unsubsidized. That's where the government wants the student to pay the interest while they're in school. Well, I'm here to tell you that the government actually doesn't make them. The government doesn't force them. The government gives them a checkbox that says, do you want to pay the interest or not? And if they put no and choose not to pay that interest, that's fine with the government. But those students, all of that interest adds up. And when they cease to be enrolled in at least half time, guess what? All that interest is then added back to that principal, and now the student is going to pay interest on top of interest and principal. It's not the best deal. It's not the best kind of loan. The next thing is a federal Parent Plus loan. A Parent Plus loan is a loan for a parent. The parent applies and has to go through a credit check. If the parent is approved, then that loan is in that parent's name. If that parent is denied, then that student can come in and ask for additional unsubsidized money in the student's name. But remember, what is it about that unsubsidized money? The unsubsidized money is where the student has to pay all that interest. So just be aware of that. Remember those federal Perkins loans? I'm not going to go over those because I think they're completely going away. Federal work study is, guess what? Work while you're in school, while you're studying. Those funds are limited funds. So you need to the student needs to talk with the school to see what their policy is on getting a work study position. There's also a question on the FAFSA that says, are you interested in work study? I always tell everyone to mark yes, because you never know. The next thing is a TEACH grant. A TEACH grant is a grant that could become a loan with all the interest added back. TEACH grants are scheduled for students who are in certain majors and are in high needs fields and are planning on teaching in low income areas. The students have to, if they receive this, they have to sign an agreement to serve, agreeing that they will teach for 4 out of 8 years in a low income area in one of the high needs fields. If a student fails to do this, then guess what? All the interest, it becomes a loan, and all the interest is then added back. So then it becomes a type of unsubsidized loan. The next thing is a supplemental grant. The supplemental grant is a grant where schools get only a small amount of money. And so I get a couple of $100,000 a year. So that goes quickly. So that's something that's given out first come, first served to those students who are eligible. All right? Now you notice down here at the bottom I have listed what was need-based and what was considered not need-based. So this is what it looks like. When we get all of your information, we see if you're eligible for grants, for loans, for work study, and then we offer you something through an award letter. Now, I'm going to tell you that through an award letter, we will send, JSU sends a notification to that student's JSU email address. So make sure your students and parents are checking that email address from the school. So this is one of the biggest things out there. Will now FAFSA pay for everything? Well, it may or may not. And what I mean by that is that a student who goes to a four-year school, it will not pay. If you notice on here, I believe it's down in towards the bottom half of the page, I have the current Pell Grant for 15-16. It's $5,775. That's divided half fall, half spring. The tuition here at JSU is $3,600. Is that going to cover it? No, it's not. And then the release recently of the $5,815 from the government, that's going to be $2,908 for one semester and $2,907 for the next semester. So once again, it's not going to cover everything. The student needs to make preparation. If you notice about the student loans, a freshman can receive $5,500 in student loans. That's $2,750 for the fall and $2,750 for the spring. And the government takes a loan fee out of that. Not to mention that up to $3,500 of that can be subsidized money, but the rest is going to be unsubsidized, so they're going to be paying interest. Now, they can get an additional $4,000 minus a loan fee if the parent applies and is turned down. But if you go somewhere, the student needs to know, don't get in loan debt if you can go to the local 2-year and the Pell Grant pay for everything. In most cases, the Pell Grant can pay for everything at 2-year schools. Now, so let's think about this. Let's talk about scholarships. I'm here to tell you that the studentaid.gov website that I just went to, you can type this in and put need money, and there's a section for scholarships. Here's a couple of other scholarships that I recommend, fastweb.com and zinch.com. Zinch.com is actually owned by a textbook company called Check, which is actually a lot cheaper to rent textbooks than to buy them, and then you return them later on so that you are not held liable for those. So make sure that you speak with the college to see what scholarships they have. Wells Fargo also has a huge scholarship resource page. So make sure that whatever you do, make sure your students do not put in their social security number into any website that is for scholarships, because we don't want it to be an identity theft situation. The U.S. Department of Labor has a scholarship search. If you type in U.S. Department of Labor scholarship search, it's going to bring up their website. Okay? If you type in U.S. Department of Labor and look at their website, I'm here to tell you it's hard to find it. But if you notice on here, this is a screenshot, award types. It has all different kinds of awards. It breaks it down by residence or affiliation or studies. This website goes anywhere from being, and so does Zinch, 5th graders all the way up to like 100 years old. I'm telling you, you need to make sure, if anybody, whether you want to start to school or another person who wants to start to school, it doesn't matter. Not too long ago, we had a student, not here at our school, but it was on the news, that they were in like the 8th grade, and they had been applying for scholarships since the 5th grade, and they had gotten over $1 million worth of scholarships just waiting on them to graduate. So the government has a lot of different comparison tools out there, and you can see this is what the government offers to you. However, I'm going here to tell you that you need to be aware of comparison tools. A lot of them do not list fees. For example, JSU's tuition and Alabama's tuition on certain websites appear to be the same. However, JSU has a general fee of $150 currently per semester, whereas other schools have many, many, many different fees based on their major or whatever it may be. Sometimes it's in the fine print, and so you need to make sure you talk to that school to see what fees might apply. It could range anywhere from a very small fee to a very large fee. I had a friend of mine who went to an in-state school here and paid $3,600 in fees for her 2 children this past year. So just be aware that that was over and above tuition. make sure your parents and students know to look for all the fine print and to make sure that they contact that school, okay? If you don't know if you don't know some wording, or your students and parents don't, go to that studentaid.gov website that I showed you a few minutes ago, and you can type in glossary, and there's a great glossary in there. Now, the government has several different things. They have websites and they have mobile devices. They also have a Facebook feed, a Twitter feed, and a YouTube. We have a lot of high school counselors that actually use the YouTube on TVs outside of their offices or during breaks throughout their school, and they run the videos with federal student aid. They have a lot of information on financial literacy, especially when students at 17-year-olds can get a loan. They need to know some of this about the financial literacy. Now, the government also has some information called the Financial Aid Toolkit for counselors. I would highly suggest you go and register yourself with that. I put the information in about the student aid as a student dependent or independent. You can also order your own publications for free at fsapubs.gov. You just have to have your OPEID number and be registered with them. So you have the contact information for Cash for College here with Jennifer. And, of course, now we'll open this up for questions. I know this is a lot of information, and you may have to go back and think about those questions. If you need to email me or Jennifer, you're welcome to, and we'll be glad to help you as best as we can. Jennifer?
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was really wonderful information and a lot of great tips, I think, for everyone. If you have a question that you'd like for us to answer now, please type it in the chat box, and we can read it and answer that question here online. So you'll see the chat box. I know some people are listening via phone, so they probably don't have that option. So asking for my contact information, again, it's Jennifer Arsenian, and my email address is cashforcollege@alabamapossible.org. I also have a Gmail address up there too, but you'll be getting emails from me, and those will be from Cash for College at alabamapossible.org. So after this webinar, you'll get an email from me, so you'll have my contact information. Okay, we have another question. I'm just going to scroll up to read it for you. Can students use their 2014 tax information to fill out the 16-17 FAFSA if their parents have not received their tax information yet?
Yes, you actually can use the 2014 tax information. However, once the parent files the taxes for 15, they need to go in and click that login button at the FAFSA.gov website. Log in, go to the parent information tab, and use the IRS data retrieval tool or put in the correct amounts. So you can use it, but you need to correct it.
Great. Any other questions? Again, feel free to put them into the chat box. You can also email me or email Stephanie, and we'll get answers to you after the session is over. So just give people one more minute to put any questions in the chat box. Okay, I don't see any more coming up right now. Stephanie, I want to thank you again for that wonderful information. And again, we have recorded the session. Do you have any final comments on your end,
Just
Stephanie?
remember, yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And just remember, it is free at FAFSA.gov. And if you're not sure of a dependency status, make sure you check that studentaid.gov. It's a great and wonderful tool for counselors. I do want to preface studentaid.gov with this. It is of general information, so it may not apply to all schools and all programs. So just keep in mind that is general information at that studentaid.gov, but it's a very important website that can be used for all kinds of things and to see what's out there, or even those PDFs and pictures that I showed you. You can actually print those off or pull them up and show your student. They're great flowcharts out there.
Great, thank you so much. And we will be sending out toolkits and more information throughout the year to those schools that have signed up for Cash for College program. Thank you, everyone who participated today. Again, thank you, Stephanie, for the great information. And I hope you all have a lovely day. And please contact us if you have any questions after the webinar. Thanks, everyone.